This episode contains specific and graphic information about a crime. Please be advised.
When you're, at the stabbing end of a butcher knife, you don't really want to take any chances. And I guess that's the hardest part of all, knowing all the things I had to do to stay alive. And even more importantly, to keep my kids alive.
Welcome to True Crime Prevention, the podcast that melds true crime with real solutions. Let's expose how all crime starts the same way, with a chance. Today, we won't give it the chance. I'm Paul DelPonte, and I work with McGruff the Crime Dog. Thank you for joining us. And we're very pleased to have with us Julie Weil. Julie has a tragic story, but at the end, she offers real hope and real solutions, and really has been a stalwart of the movement to help prevent violence against women. Julie, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here today and to be able to talk to your listeners about how important it is that we prevent crime. And no better way to learn about that than to talk about true crime stories, where you can apply some of the lessons from those moving forward.
You know, Julie, it's sort of hard to describe what you went through. And I've heard you speak before, and you do it with such eloquence. And one thing about both this podcast in working for McGruff, we never do is one thing we never do is blame the victim. Because
Absolutely.
A lot of times blaming the victim interferes and gets in the way with catching the culprit. And I think you encountered some of that. So why don't we begin, tell our listeners and viewers basically what happened and as much as, I'm sure it's painful for you to relive it, but let's let people know.
Well, the story starts out in Miami, Florida, which is where I grew up. But where I lived in Miami was a really small community. It was a suburb south of the city, very little crime, not a lot of transient people coming in and out. It was families that had lived there for a long time. Everybody walked their dog. Everybody played at the park. And I had two little kids at the time. I was a stay-at-home mom with a child who was just a little over 3 and then an 8-month-old son.
Wow.
And on the day in question, which was a long time ago now, my son was 8 months old. My daughter was 3. And we went to drop off my older child at the church preschool around the corner from my house. Going to the church, it was like going home. I had been worshiping there since 1978. It was just, my dad was a deacon. I ran a Bible study. I had, grown up in this church. So moving around the campus was like moving around my own yard. We successfully dropped my daughter off. My infant son and I went to run errands. And when we came back that day, we were running a little bit late. And by the time we walked out to our car, we were among the last people still around. I had my son on my hip. My daughter, I was holding her hand. We crossed the street to get into the car. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine who had pulled up behind me. My daughter's dancing around. I'm buckling my son into his car seat and I'm talking to my friend and I'm kind of distracted. The second my friend drove away, I heard a rustling behind me and I got cracked over the head by what felt like a brick. What it was the butt of a 6-inch butcher knife. And somebody, a stranger that I didn't know, had come out of the bushes that I was parked near in the rear of the parking lot and disabled me from behind, lifted me up, and then drew the knife across my neck. And
Wow.
he asked, his first question was, do you believe in God? And I said, yes, I was, out of church. I do believe in God. And he said to me, then you're going to forgive me for what I'm about to do to you and to your 2 kids today. And with that, my heart sunk because I knew he didn't just want my van. He didn't want my wallet. He had something planned for us. And he was struggling to get me in the van. I kept resisting, pushing back, but he was, pushed me in the van. Finally threw me inside, grabbed the keys out of my hand. My daughter tried to jump out of the van and she was screaming. And we were sure somebody would hear us. I mean, there was class in session till 3:00 at the preschool. So, she was screaming and screaming and he picked her up. He threw her to the back of the van and he shut the door behind me. And before we could make eye contact or I could see anything, he said to me, do not make eye contact with me. I have done this so many times before, and I know what I'm going to do to you today is punishable by life in prison, which again just stabbed me in the heart
Sure.
because I thought, what is he going to do to us? And he said, if you can ID me, I'll just kill you because I'm not going to prison. And so I kept my eyes shut very tightly. He ordered me to get into the passenger seat. My daughter was just up walking around in the van. My son was screaming. He got in the front seat, demanded my license, and when he looked at it, he said, "Oh, wow, lucky me, you live right around the corner. I want to go to your house. I just got out of prison. I've been incarcerated for the last 7 months. I need money and I need a gun. So we're going to go to your house." And I told him I didn't have any money and we didn't have any guns in our house. But he didn't really believe me. He drove me to my house. He quickly found out when we got there was no money and no guns, and he was pretty upset. We all got back in the van, and and some of this is kind of graphic, but it's important because it plays into how he was caught eventually. He called my daughter up, had her sit in the passenger seat, and I kneeled on the floor in between the two front seats. And he pulled down his shorts. He forced me to perform oral sex on him as he drove. And, just this helpless feeling. I thought somebody at my house would see something. I saw somebody at the church would see something. Um, but nobody did. And so now he started driving and he was driving south. My daughter, who's 3, is in like the front seat of the van. She's screaming and crying and he's beating me over the head and he's saying all sorts of things. He's, asking my daughter why I'm such a terrible person. This wouldn't happen. God hates us. Um, you know, and she was looking out the window as we drove down these back alleys to kind of get to the highway. So I knew he was driving in areas where there wasn't going to be a lot of traffic. He must have been a local guy because he knew the back roads. And in the end, he ended up driving us south of where we lived all the way out to the Florida Everglades
Mm.
into the space that separates Miami from the Florida Keys. It's, hundreds and hundreds of acres of nothingness. And he took me out there that day as far out as he could. Um, and he parked my van next to the swamp. And he told my 3-year-old daughter if she did anything that wasn't in accordance with what he wanted, he would, drown our van in the
Mm.
swamp. She would be eaten by alligators. My son is crying. Um, and at that point, he raped me extremely, extremely violently. With my daughter standing right next to me. I'm having to, touch my shoulder, touch my arm, watch everything that was happened. And then he had me so that I wasn't looking directly at his face, turn around and look in my son's eyes and hold my son's hand while I was being raped.
Mm.
And he said, for the rest of your life, I want you to, every single time you look in your son's eyes, I want you to remember what it felt like when I raped you. And it lasted forever. And, I tried to get out of it, but there really isn't. When somebody has your children, you can't just jump out of the car. And when you're in
Right.
the middle of the Everglades, there's nobody to come and help you. And when you're, at the stabbing end of a butcher knife, you don't really want to take any chances either.
Right.
So you do whatever they say. And I guess that's the hardest part of all. And that's the hardest part to recover from is just knowing all the things I had to do to stay alive. And even more importantly, to keep my kids alive. Um, After we left the Everglades that day, he then took me to an abandoned lime warehouse down, again, south, right before you get to the Florida Keys. There, he took my rings. He forced us to have a wedding ceremony. He told my children that he had killed their father.
Oh my
And,
God.
and I didn't know because maybe he did. This guy was so violent that maybe I didn't know it, but my husband was already dead. And so he, told my daughter, my son, who, my son didn't understand, but he said, I'm your new daddy now. We had to get married in front of them, consummate the relationship in front of them. You exchange rings. And then with each time, and this is important, this is actually the most important thing I should tell you. He bragged about how he had done this so many times. He had just done it 10 days before at a church just about 5 miles down the road from where I lived. And that didn't even make the nightly news. He said, I'm never going to be caught. And part of his reasoning was how he got rid of the DNA. Not to be graphic, but he When he neared completion of the rapes, he forced me to swallow the DNA with a knife on my neck and said, if you throw up one drop of this, I'll kill you. And so he raped me out in the Everglades. Then he raped me at the lime warehouse. Then he raped me alongside an open field again. And then at the very end of this very long string of events, he, in the middle of all of it, he took me to a bank. And at this point, I thought to myself, this is how I'm going to be saved, right? I'm now not in the Keys. I'm not in the Everglades. He's taken me to a bank. We've switched places. I was in the driver's seat. He went in the back with my daughter and held a knife on her neck so she didn't alert anyone. I went through the drive-through teller and my face was all beaten up at this point and I was hot and I was miserable and I looked like I had been crying for 2 or 3 hours, which I had. And I was certain that the woman was going to notice. And all she said to me was, is there anything else I can do for you today? I sent over my card. I asked to withdraw as much money as I could from my savings account and my checking account. She said the maximum was $400. Sent the money over. Is there anything else I can do for you? And I said no. And I drove away. And he saw the bank receipt. He saw that there was still money in the account. And he said, I need it all. So I suggested we drive up to the area where he took me from to my actual bank. Maybe I'd be able to get out the money there. But before we went to the bank, he picked a random park. And the park that he picked in a city of 3 million people happened to be the park that was adjacent to my childhood elementary school. But was also directly across the street from my mom and dad's house. So much so that when we drove by, I could see my mom's car in the driveway. So
Wow.
all these chances I feel at my church to get help, in my neighborhood to get help, driving down the highway, somebody seeing my daughter screaming in the front seat, at the bank. And now my mom is so close and just so many chances to yell for help. But once you've been taken, you don't always have that
Right,
opportunity.
right.
And
And it's amazing you had as much mental awareness at that point to even recognize where you were.
Paul, it took every ounce of energy I had. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I didn't have breakfast that day. We didn't get to have lunch. So my children were starving. My son my son was 8 months old. He needed to eat. Everybody, he had soiled his diapers. My daughter had, soiled herself. It, it was complete chaos. And what ended up happening was the most brutal and violent rape was that very last one, because he said to me, I'm not so sure that you haven't seen me. We had gone to another bank in the interim. He let me get out of the car while he was in the driver's seat. I punched all the buttons. I mouthed, help me into the camera, thinking that the camera at the ATM would help. Camera was down that day, unfortunately. My hope also was that the camera would be situated in a way that could get a visual on him because he was in the van parked right behind it. But again, it was so scary to separate myself from my kids. He's on the driver's seat. He has my children. And as it turned out, they wouldn't give me any money anyway, because I had reached my daily limit. So by the time we get to this park near my mom's house, he's mad. He's not sure he wants to keep me alive. He has raped, sodomized, and beat me senseless. And at that point, I think I started to fade a little bit. But then, he ends up raping me again for a fourth time. And I see that we're moving and I'm kind of disoriented. And he ended up taking me back to the church where he abducted me from, parking in some shrubbery. He made my daughter beg, don't kill my mom, don't kill my mom. He took, he laid me down in between my kids and just pushed a butcher knife into the back of my neck. Not so much that he caused a lot of blood, but enough that there was pressure in the back of my skull with this knife. And I thought I was dying and I was thirsty. I hadn't had anything to drink all day. I hadn't eaten, an entire day and into the evening now. And I just passed out on the floor, convinced that's how I was going to die. But before that last rape, he had thrown my underwear at me and asked me to wipe down all the surfaces of my car. So for 4 rapes, I had swallowed the DNA. Now he was asking me to wipe down all the surfaces of the car to get rid of any prints. And I tried to fake him out by not, doing the radio or something. And he said, I see what you're doing. You'll never outsmart me. He had shaved all his body hair. I had known that. I had noticed that during the assaults. And then he just left me there,
Wow.
really basically for dead on the floor of
Yeah.
my van. And I woke up because my daughter started screaming, "Mommy, he's gone. He's gone. You've got to get up. You've got to get up." And that's what took all the energy I had to just get up to look over the dashboard. And I saw him, maybe 500 feet away, just sauntering along the road, not hiding in the bushes or anything, just
Mm.
walking along the street, I guess going back to wherever his car was. Just like nothing had happened. And I remember thinking to myself, you have to remember everything about how he smelled, what he sounded like, what he looked like when he was walking away from me. I noticed he had a very distinct hairline, like he had recently got a haircut, and his hair had been buzzed. And so I was trying to notice every little thing I could. And I was terrified for my husband, and we were going to go to his office to see if he was there. But then I realized I don't know where my clothes are at
Right.
this point, and I knew my mom was home. So we went to my mom's house. I ran inside, half naked, bleeding, beat up, screaming I had been raped. And she ran out. I locked the kids in the car. I gave her the key. She went out to be with the kids. Um, and my dad had been on the phone with my mom, and I said, "Dad, I can't call 911. I can't." And he said, "Julie, you have to. You have to call 911." And I said, "He told me he would kill me. He knows where I live. He knows where my kids go to school. He would come back and kill me if I told anyone." But I listened to my dad. I called the police. They arrived within about 2 minutes, a female first responder. And even when I got to my parents' house, I didn't feel a sense of calm. But when I saw that officer come into my house with her badge and her gun, I think that was the first time I had exhaled all day.
Well, that's good. You felt the calm. I mean, I sitting here listening, I got chills. And I commend you for being able to share your story, and you share it with purpose.
I tried.
And that I think is heroic that you survived that, but
It was hard.
even more commendable for what happened after. So you're there with an officer,
Yeah.
and you're starting to feel at least a
I feel
little
I feel human. Like I feel like
right.
he's not going to grab me back. That I've reached safety somehow. I'm terrified now that I've opened this can of worms and called the police, that I've set off a new chain of reactions, where he'll show up at my house and kill me or take my children. Um, but what I didn't know is what it was like to be a rape victim, to be a crime victim. I had grown up, in a very, a world that didn't involve a lot of crime.
Right.
And you get into it and you realize, holy cow, how important is to, have agencies in your communities that have protocols for things like this, and who are trained in how to respond to victims and how to put people at ease and tell them what the next step in the process is. I sat there with that officer until, the detective could arrive, and in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, telling her the most disgusting details. And I think, even just opening up to a stranger and talking about what happened. And I gave you the super abbreviated version of really what was hell on earth. It made such a difference that in Dade County, and I didn't know this going into it, that they had one of the best sexual assault response teams in the country, and everybody had received great training. So when they were directing me what to do next, my dad eventually got home. My husband found out, through my parents. He came home. He was alive, which we all
Sigh
celebrated.
of relief. Yeah.
Everybody wanted me to be taken to the hospital, the closest hospital, as quickly as possible. When I learned that where I really needed to go was to a certified rape crisis center. I needed to be seen by a professional, a nurse who could take evidence in a way that would hold up in court, in an environment that was victim centered, where they knew how to talk to you, how to believe you, how to instill that belief that they believed you.
Extremely important.
So important. And I feel like, years later, when I stepped out and I looked at what was going on in other communities, I had an exceptional experience. And what happened to me was terrible, but what happened and how I was treated was very professional. And because of that, I was able to sustain myself through 4 years in the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, in my rape kit, they found nothing because I had swallowed all of the DNA and he had shaved all of his body hair. They found no DNA. They found no errant hairs. I was roughed up. I had bite marks, bruises, and stuff like that. Um, but there was no DNA left behind. And, that's disheartening after a 3-hour exam. I mean, it took hours for them to do the exam. It's not like it is on TV where it all happens in 15 minutes. It takes a while. And it took a long time for my husband to send me even clothes to wear. And,
Right.
um, and then we had to go to another place to give a sketch and then to another place to give a statement. So I'm being bounced around town until, early morning the next day. And I had it good. Most people don't have it like that. The police let me know they found absolutely nothing in my van, not a single print, not a single hair, nothing. So this guy really was a chameleon. I mean, he bragged to me that he had been doing this successfully for a very long time, and now I see why.
Oh.
But about 6 days after it happened, I got a call from the police in Miami, and they had been in contact with the lab, the forensic lab in Miami, who had looked at the rape kit. And I was so fortunate to have such a competent analyst who didn't just test the kit. She tested my foundation garments, my bra, and my underwear. There was nothing on that. So usually if there's nothing in the kit and nothing on your foundation garments, they won't go any further. Um, but she did. And she ended up finding a teeny tiny speck of DNA on the shirt I was wearing. And it got on there when we went to that first bank. And he had asked me to go through the drive-through teller, and I had to put my shirt over my head. There was a tiny bit of DNA still on my lips, and it transferred to the inside of the shirt. So in his greed, trying to get money and giving me this shirt, he ended up, making a mistake. And I was very blessed to be in Miami where they had very high level instrumentation, and a lot of good DNA technology. And they were able to take that teeny tiny mixed sample back over 20 years ago and upload it into the system. It hit on another rape with the exact same MO, but no identity. We didn't know who this guy was, but we knew he was a serial rapist.
And the knowing the importance of the evidence in a rape case is critical.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'll tell you, and it's growing more critical over time because even in consensual, even if somebody's trying to prove, a defense and saying, "Oh no, it was consensual," the DNA doesn't matter. Just even having DNA matters.
Absolutely.
Right? And so people think, oh, well, nobody's going to believe me. I'm not going to go get a test done, or I'm not going to call the police, or all these things. It's so important to go, even if you're afraid, and even if you don't think anybody's going to believe you, to go for that test and get that DNA so they can put it in the system. So what ended up happening to me is I stayed in my house. I was terrified for 6 months, and then I got really, really lucky, and this horrible man committed domestic violence in a hotel. And an innocent bystander called in the domestic violence. The police came. He went to a station. And at that point, Miami-Dade was trying to catch him. He was known as the daycare rapist. They had put out a task force, and they were asking for voluntary swabs and IDs from anybody who would give it up if they looked relatively, I couldn't give it an exact description of his face, but I could give more or less on his coloring. My daughter filled in a lot of the blanks. She
So
was,
there was some community awareness building.
yes. Well, yes, right afterwards there was. Once that was done, he was white, non-Hispanic, about 5'10", broad shoulders. He didn't have any body hair. He had a buzz cut, but I could tell just from what little I saw that it had a little bit of a brownish reddish hue to it. I knew that he had no discernible accent. He kept referencing the DC sniper because that case was going on at the time. And he said, "I'm going to stand in the field across from your house and I'm going to shoot you
Mm.
the next time you come out your front door. If you tell anyone I'm better than the DC sniper." So I knew he had access to a TV. He was well spoken. His vocabulary was good. He had a haircut. Obviously, there were people in his life. He wasn't, he wasn't just out there with no ties to the community. So put out the pictures. John Walsh got on the case on America's Most Wanted a week after it happened. It struck a little too close to home. His son Adam had been murdered in the same Everglades um, that we were all in, and he put it on his show 3 times.
Wow.
But when the man was taken in through bystander intervention, he was kind of stupid and gave up all his information and DNA and all of that. And in Miami, they didn't have what's known now as the rape kit backlog. They were testing cases at a pretty good pace, regardless of the circumstances, not just stranger cases, but all cases. And when they ran it on the domestic violence call, it matched up with the DNA from my rape. So then they had an identity. And this was end of January of 2003. And my assault happened the year before in 2002. And so we finally have a face and a name to this person. Bulletins go out all over the state of Florida. John Walsh puts it on America's Most Wanted. Everybody's looking for him. And then one night in late March of 2003, he was sleeping on the side of the road. Oh, what's interesting and something that I should talk about, because predators can be so predatory. I mean, they think of everything. He had been telling me during the rape that his mother was a prostitute. His dad was a John. He grew up on the streets of Miami, drug addicted, never graduated from high school, had just gotten out of prison. Well, the truth was, when they caught him, he was sleeping. It was about 2 blocks from his parents' house. And I was surprised. Some police officers saw a car on the side of the road and they pulled over, and they didn't notice it was stolen or anything first. They just knocked on the windows and said, "Hey buddy, you can't sleep here. You got to go." And when he looked up, they looked at him and they were like, "Huh." They asked for his ID and they looked at it and they said, "This is the guy the whole country's looking for right now."
Wow.
And they actually had dashboard cams so I could see, the arrest and hear everything that happened. It was fascinating and horrifying. But he was just 2 blocks from his parents' house. His mom was a church secretary, and that's why he prayed. All the rapes that they were able to tie him to came from Presbyterian church preschools, him just abducting
Wow.
young moms with kids. And then his dad was ATF for the federal agent, or for the federal government. He worked ATF, and he worked multiple Secret Service details for the presidency. And so he knew how to scare people. The police spent so much time wasting time looking for parolees, looking for people who dropped out of high school, looking in all these places, when the truth was he was from an upper middle class family, went to my rival high school, had a law enforcement dad and a church secretary for a mom.
It goes to show something that I talk about a lot is too often it's important in police work not to fall into stereotypes.
Exactly.
Because if you look for the stereotype, many times the real suspect gets away.
Exactly. And that's what happened to him. In fact, I do a lot of police trainings, to talk about this stuff. And I was at a training down in Miami with new officers, and a woman was there and she said, "Did you know that when all this was going on, when all they had was a sketch, I had your sketch on my refrigerator while he was putting together a play set in my backyard?" And what had happened was people would get names. And because his parents were affiliated with a church, they would say, "Oh, my son's a day laborer. If you need cabinetry done or play sets built or whatever." And people would say, "Oh, this is a kid from the church or a guy
Right.
related to people in the church." So the bells don't go off that even though that guy in the sketch might look like him, you just kind of discount it because you think, "Oh, somebody
Right,
from
the guy from the church, right?
And that's how he would operate in the community because he was squeaky clean looking, and he would
Right.
pray at churches.
So at this point, the arrest has been made.
Yeah, they make an arrest. Um, they take him in. It takes a very long time to go to court. But when they first take him in and they're transporting him, he was arrested in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, which is about 3 hours, 4 hours from Miami. When they were driving him back to Miami, he gave up a confession. He was talking to the officer in the car, gave up kind of a confession. But when he got to the police station in Miami, he wouldn't sign the confession and it wasn't taped, and his dad advised him not to. And so even though we had all this information, including how he hunted for and abducted his other victims, none of it was admissible in court.
Mm.
And so, it was crazy though to read his confession and look at how he just hunted people and what things they would do or what I did that I don't even consider mistakes, but I will never make again, parking on the edge of the parking lot,
Right.
back around, where people can't really see you next to bushes and trees and, not knowing more about self-defense and how to resist somebody taking you better. Because if I could have just gotten away in the start, none of the rest of this stuff would have even, come to pass. But,
Right.
and he put each of the four women that I know that he took. And then I also know that he was responsible for an acquaintance rape in Fairfax County. Um,
In
and,
Virginia.
in Virginia. And I don't know when I should segue into talking about like laws and legislation and stuff
Well,
like that.
so the trial proceeded. Were they able to get a conviction?
They were. It was absolutely incredible. 4 years passed from the date of my assault until the day of my trial. The assault was on October 16th and the trial started 4 years later on Halloween Day. And let me tell you, trials are not for the weak of heart.
Absolutely.
But that's also part of the reason a lot of people don't end up in jail, because you just get so tired as a victim that sometimes you give up along the way because you just want it to be over.
Well, I commend you because not only did you not give up, you seemed energized. And what I think is the real heroic part of the story are the things that happened after.
Yeah.
You
It's
became politically engaged.
yeah.
You
Totally
became
engaged. Yeah.
mobily. I mean, your schedule, your speaking schedule, is one that most people can't keep up with. And you are out there raising the banner of prevention, warning people, letting people know what to do. You are speaking to police departments across the country, urging them to stay on top of the technology and the
Yes.
importance. So tell us a little bit, at what point did it trigger in your mind, I can do something?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of times people say it is so horrible that your children were involved in this. And let me tell you, my kids being involved was the worst part. And my children's journeys, they're young adults now. They've been through a lot. But I will tell you that they are what energized me, because when it was all done and we were sitting alone and the healing was so hard and it was so painful, I just kept thinking to myself, they are my reason to get up every day, every day. And I cannot have this man walking the face of the earth while my children are still alive, while I'm still alive. I can't have that. And, several times that day, I begged him to kill me in place of killing my children, because he kept saying he was going to kill them. He was going to kill them. And I'm like, no, 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 kill me, kill me, kill me, please. And I remember thinking, if I was willing to die for them, right, to save their lives, I need to keep them alive in this world. And to do that, this man can never see the light of day. So 2 years in, they were trying to try him on all four cases. 2 years in, they offered a 30-year plea deal for all four cases of rape and the children that were involved in all of them. And I said, no, 30 years isn't enough. He would have been 71 when he got out. He was 41 when he committed the crime. He had 5 children of his own. And I said, no way. So they went to trial just on my case alone, not taking into account the 3 other women. And just on my case, they got 7 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 15 years.
Wow.
I believe he is still the longest serving person who's not committed a murder in the state of Florida.
Wow.
For crimes that committed on one day where no murder was involved. He got 7 life sentences, 1 for my son, 1 for my daughter, and 5 life sentences without parole for what he did to me. And it took work. It would have been so easy to take that plea deal. It would have been
Absolutely.
so much behind
Well,
us. But
we certainly commend your courage in moving forward. And then, so you mentioned Florida, and I
yeah,
know you were involved in some legislative changes
yeah.
in Florida. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, actually, the legislative changes, strangely enough, happened in Washington, D.C. first. Somebody had heard me speak. I went out and I started speaking at churches, women's groups, everywhere, saying, listen, these are the safety tips you need to know to make yourself less vulnerable when you're traveling around with children. Walk intently with a purpose. Make sure you're laser focused on getting in your car. Use the button on your car to open and shut doors. Don't be fumbling for keys. Use the alarm, the panic button. Don't park on the edges of parking lot. Park close to your destination, well lit. Somebody had heard me speak, called their state senator, who was Arlen Specter at the time, senior senator from the state of Pennsylvania, who was the head of the Committee on Crime and Drugs. And they said, you got to listen to this woman's story, and how she made it from that 911 call all the way through to 7 life sentences for her perpetrator. And he called me, we talked, and he had me come testify before the U.S. Senate on why rape is the most underreported, underprosecuted crime in America, to the point where only 3% of rapists ever spend a day in jail and 97% go free. We did that. And then I got involved in a federal bill called the SAFER Act, the Sexual Assault Forensic Reporting Act. And I walked the halls of Capitol Hill for 2.5 years to pass that. And what that bill did was to free up funding in every state in America that wanted to take advantage of it to count how many backlog kits they had. The backlog wasn't happening at the labs. It was happening at the police departments when they weren't even sending the kits to be tested because, it was your husband, your skirt was too short, you were drunk, you're
Blaming the
homeless,
victim.
prostitute, all the victim blaming reasons. And they thought, oh, they'll never win this case. So they never even sent the DNA to be tested. And luckily for me, my DNA went right away, but he did have an acquaintance rape case in Fairfax County, and he had 2 domestic violence cases in Miami-Dade County. If any of those kids had ever been tested, he would have been apprehended long before he started nabbing strangers off the street. So what I did was I advocated, to have the federal bill passed. And surprisingly, it passed unanimously in 2013, on my son's birthday in 2013, after 2 years on Capitol Hill. Then I came back to the state of Florida and I said, we need to take advantage of this. Let's do the inventory. We found 13,462 cases here in Florida that had never been tested. When they finally caught up on the backlog, they were able to test 8,000 kits and get almost 2,000 hits. That's 2,000 perpetrators just here in Florida that were identified.
And it is one of the things that at the National Crime Prevention Council we talk about the importance of is community involvement.
Yes.
And it is community pressure
Uh-huh.
that ultimately solves crimes. It was You Were on America's Most Wanted.
Yes.
The case was featured. People saw it. People were aware.
And I think in terms of moving forward with the national movement and the prevention, people just didn't know that there was a backlog. I would meet people and they'd say, well, I was sexually assaulted, and they just didn't have any evidence. And I said, did they not have evidence, or was it not tested?
Right.
Oh, well, let me call and find out.
And what we're finding out, oftentimes it's both.
Yeah. And so now all of a sudden, the United States, we have no backlog in Florida, no discernible backlog right now, because we got on top of it. And then in 2016, we passed a test all kits law. Then 2021, we passed a tracking law. So now you're accountable, right? You as a victim have a barcode on your kit. The police let you know that. And now you log in like you're tracking a FedEx package. And they can't say, oh, I lost it, I misplaced it. And there are timelines for when it needs to be at the lab, when it needs to be fully tested. And you have places to go and transparency in the system now. But until you educate people on what's happening and the breadth of what's happening, when I got involved, there were 400,000 estimated kits across America that had never been tested. People with horrific stories, just like mine, who were never given the opportunity to seek justice because the DNA was never tested. So I try to talk to everybody, try to train police. You can't just throw it on a pile and walk away.
Absolutely.
I try to train victims of sexual violence. You have to report. I know it is so hard, but you have to report and get a rape kit done, because in the state of Florida, they have to test every single kit they take. And all it takes is one kit uploaded into the system. They estimate that a person who's a sexual predator offends 6 times before they're caught. Think about all the
Wow.
prevention we can do just by getting the DNA in the system.
There is a lot of opportunity out there. One thing I know for sure is Julie Weil will keep on speaking out.
Yes.
And we're going to speak out with her. So as part of this, we are going to have an episode guide on our website, ncpc.org, that you can visit. You can learn more about the availability or lack of availability of rape kits in your state, making sure that they're out there, make sure they get tested and that run through the system, because that is what is going to lead to actual convictions.
Right.
Violence,
And the more we
again,
get off the street,
the more we get off the street, the more we speak out, the more attention is focused to it. There is not one good reason why rape kits should not be readily available in every community across the country, why every sexual assault victim should be treated with respect and courtesy and have the proper evidence collected, the rape kit completed, and it processed so we can get those matches around the country. As you say, 6 times. We have the opportunity in just one person to prevent 6 rapes. If we just do the work, we do the evidence, we not that people have the courage like Julie did or your parents did to call 911. It's not easy in that moment. As you're living proof, you've been through so much, and to pick up the phone is sometimes hard to do, but it's essential to do. And that on the other end of the phone, not just the 911 operator, but everybody involved in the criminal justice system, potential jurors out there, trust the victim, listen to the victim. Well, so in wrapping up, a few things. One, for our viewers and listeners, don't forget to click like and subscribe. We want you to hear more. Each week, we're going to come to you with a new episode with a story this gripping, but with also the information that you can take and build hope and build prevention. Julie, any last minute thoughts or any other things that people should be aware of to help avoid the situation?
To avoid the situation, I think be aware of your surroundings. And one thing that I need to drive home first is we need to make people more comfortable in reporting sexual assault. And please know that the country is changing. We have this whole We Believe movement now that's the intent of it is to let victims know where you're going. These rape crisis centers, sexual assault centers, they're trained with people who will believe you and they will help you in the system. But there are things that you can do in your everyday life. Just something as simple as making eye contact with someone. If I had looked him in the eye, he would have been gone. He didn't want to be identified and he kept driving that home to me. So something as simple as making eye contact, being laser focused when you go to your vehicle. And then when something does happen, taking that difficult step to call, to report, because we need to stop the chain of violence. And the only way we can do this is to get harmful predators off the street. And how we do that is by people coming forward and getting justice. And I need people to know out there that there is help. There are kind people, there are networks, and you don't have to do it alone.
Well, again, we commend you for your courage and your perseverance in speaking out and continuing to speak out, because that's what it takes.
Yeah.
The one thing, criminals are cowards. They may act tough, but when you confront them, when you look them in the eye, when you shine a light on them, as you said, maybe he would have fled.
Yeah.
You don't know. But what we do know is the more we draw attention to these crimes and the more we take action, the better chances we are to take a bite out of that crime. And I thank you for doing just that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing those details. I'm sure years later, still not easy to tell. And we're glad that your husband, your kids are doing well to this day. And that in part is because I'm sure they had you as a very strong mother and maternal figure in their lives to get not just get you through this, but get the whole family through it. And so thank you again for joining us, and thank you for everything you do. It's so important.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you all, and thank you for joining us, and tune in again to True Crime Prevention. Thank you.
That's an easy way to take a bite out of crime.